Soviet disk detected. To play the Allied missions, please insert the Allied disk.
Hello everyone, I'm a Broken Robot. One of my personal favorite topics to discuss here on the show is art. Whether it comes in the form of music, traditional paintings, or even poetry, artwork holds a powerful message and emotion that often is underappreciated by the wider public. When we focus on the medium of paintings in specific, viewers will think of whimsical, awe-inspiring pieces like Starry Night, Wander Over a Sea of Fog, and maybe some of the intellectuals in the audience might reference The Cat and Two Sparrows. However, today I'd like to discuss a more serious topic with a less glorifying look at art and the way that society interprets it. Today I'd like to discuss Keith Haring and the haunting implications of his final painting. When we think of terrifying paintings, what titles do you imagine? Maybe you think of Saturn Devouring His Son by Francisco Goya and its terrifying depiction of a father murdering their own child in the name of defending their power. Or maybe you think of the painting Ivan the Terrible and His Son Ivan by Ila Repin, which shows regret and terror in the eyes of a violent king as his only son lays dying in his arms from a wound that he inflicted. Or what if I told you that one of the most haunting paintings ever conceived was never finished? Unfinished, created in 1989 by the late Keith Haring, exists as a ghostly specter into the final days of an artist's life, and the deep-seated commentary on death of the young and the futility of dying before your potential is reached. To better understand Unfinished, you have to understand Keith Haring. Keith Haring was born on May 4, 1958 in Reading, Pennsylvania. He grew up and was raised in the nearby Kutztown, Pennsylvania, and grew up in a hyper-religious household. Haring showed an early interest in art, which was nurtured by his father, who was an amateur cartoonist, who encouraged Keith to pursue his artistic ambitions. Some of his earliest recorded work was promotional material for the Jesus movement that coincided with his mother's deep-rooted connections to the church. After high school, he traveled across the United States for a while, selling t-shirts that he made himself until finally, after being threatened with a boring job in the church upon his return home from his travels, he chose to enroll at the Ivy School of Professional Art in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. A famous theme of Keith Haring's work is being anti-profit driven, often making pieces he knew would be destroyed in hours. This likely came from his time in art school and his growing appreciation for non-commercial art. After just one semester, he became disillusioned with the commercial focus on the curriculum and would receive poor grades for the work he was less than proud of. The Ivy School of Professional Art focused on things like making art that could be used for advertisements or could be sold commercially, which didn't sit well with Haring's philosophy of art being fun first. In 1978, Haring moved to New York City to attend the School of Visual Arts, where he enjoyed his time greatly compared to previous art schools. It was here that he was exposed to the burgeoning street art scene and the rampant graffiti that both artists and non-artists alike used to cover the buildings in New York City. Pop art from the 1970s, as well as his focus on geometric outlines combined with his fascination for the street art world, profoundly influenced his work. Haring began creating chalk drawings on unused advertisement panels in New York City subway stations, quickly gaining attention with his bold line art that was considered some of his best work. These geometric lines and energetic figures helped lay the framework for the rest of his career. These spontaneous pieces became his trademark and grew into a major tourism attraction within New York City, which brought Keith the attention he needed to break into the mainstream art world. He soon transitioned to using white chalk on matte black paper, which allowed his drawings to stand out even more, and also had the caveat of not being destroyed at the end of the day by an unknowing sanitation worker. In fact, even after Haring could sell a singular piece of his artwork for as much as $15,000, he continued to venture into New York subway stations to make art even when his pocketbook could purchase a million high-grade canvases. In some cases, Haring would be arrested by the police for what was technically graffiti, but after numerous arrests and the daily complaints from his admirers to the New York City Police Department, these arrests usually ended in Haring paying a $10 fine and going on his way. By the early 1980s, Haring's work had gained widespread recognition, and he began participating in gallery exhibitions alongside other emerging artists like Jean-Michel Basquiat and Kenny Schwarf. He had become close friends with figures like Andy Warhol and Madonna, and his talents were commended by artists like Fred Brathwaite and Pablo Picasso. His distinctive style, characterized by simplified forms and vibrant colors, captured the spirit of the era's youth culture and resonated with the audiences both in the art world and beyond. Keith often and openly used political causes to influence his art. Some of his most famous pieces opposed the apartheid regime in South Africa, mocked the hypocrisy of the Christian extremism movements, and even before he hit the mainstream, Keith often featured anti-rape imagery and took a strong stance against sexual violence for almost his entire adult life in an era that still swept these crimes under the rug. Keith Haring's art was not only visually striking but also deeply rooted in social movements of the 1980s, like ending racism in the Deep South and opposing big business. In 1986, he opened up the Pop Shop in New York City, a store selling merchandise featuring his designs, which allowed his work to reach a wider audience and challenge the elitism of the art world at the time. To have an award-winning, gallery-hosting artist sell prints of their work for as little as $5 was often unheard of in New York City's high art scene, until Haring broke that mold. To this day, grad school dropouts and blue-collar workers alike will don t-shirts featuring Haring's iconic artwork, and some could argue that Haring's appeal to those less artistically posh only made him more popular in the long term. New York City was where he came into his own form. His subway graffiti had become a popular tourism attraction, but he stayed for the numerous art galleries and studios that were spread across the city. He was even approached by New York City Sanitation asking him to design artwork that would promote anti-littering, formalizing his partnership with the city. His graffiti that was once scrubbed from buildings was actively being promoted by the city, with some building managers even asking Keith to tag their buildings to help them stand out. From 1987 to 1989, his art career truly went global when he traveled to Paris to feature an art exhibit, and later that same year traveled to Berlin to paint a mural on the Berlin Wall. Throughout his entire career, Keith produced over 1,000 works, ranging from simple geometric artwork that was made to look pretty to profound political art that's relevant even to this day. One of his lesser-known series of works was from 1982 to 1990, where he personally sponsored and promoted safe sex and AIDS awareness artwork. Keith Haring was an openly gay man in a time in American history where being a homosexual could lead to you being shunned by wider society, or even cost you your job. He participated in the Stonewall informational groups, and often donated to both gay and lesbian organizations. He had been blessed with hyper-Christian parents that still accepted and loved him, despite his mother's firm Lutheran beliefs. They didn't care that he was a homosexual. Keith was well aware that many homosexuals in America weren't nearly as lucky with their friends and family as he was. At a time when AIDS was still associated with being solely a homosexual disease, Keith promoted science and fairness, claiming that people with AIDS were just like you and me. In 1988, while at a New York exhibit at Club 57, Keith noticed purple spots on his thighs, and for weeks had trouble breathing, which he assumed was part of his seasonal allergies. A blackout in his New York apartment led his friends to take him to a nearby hospital, where in 1988, Keith Haring was diagnosed with AIDS, likely contracted from a blood transfusion he had underwent in 1986. Keith established the Keith Haring Foundation in 1989, which sought to raise funds and awareness for AIDS, as well as providing financial support to AIDS victims. Keith was very self-aware that AIDS was a death sentence, and had planned to use what time he had left to the best of his abilities, and even sought experimental and ineffective treatments if it would buy him more time. Despite Keith's immense wealth and connections, his AIDS treatments were ineffective at giving him more time, and his condition rapidly deteriorated. He had attempted to return to Europe one final time, but had cancelled the plans due to the uncertainty of his health. In mid-1989, Keith would unknowingly paint his final and perhaps most emotionally powerful painting. What was just supposed to be a new spin on Haring's typical style was a bold blue painting that started in the top left corner and would end in the bottom right. It took Keith hours to get done what would normally take him minutes, and his shaking hands and blurring vision made it hard for him to finish the work, leading him to deciding to leave it unfinished. It's unknown if Haring had planned this from the start, but he ended up deciding to leave the painting unfinished permanently as a simplistic but important commentary on the AIDS crisis in America. The painting's lively figures, panning from perfect renditions to unfinished edges, to oil runoff, to a blank white canvas, exists to symbolize the lives lost and the wasted potential of the many young people who died from AIDS in the 1980s and later the 1990s. Keith Haring would die on February 16, 1990 from complications with HIV. He had passed away in the city that had inspired his artistic adventures through life, surrounded by friends and family. In his memory, the Keith Haring Foundation was expanded and continues to this day, fighting for educational outreach and care for those living with HIV and AIDS. Unfinished exists as one of modern art's most haunting paintings, depicting the frailness and hopelessness that a terminal diagnosis can place in the minds of its victim. The piece serves as a firm commentary on the AIDS crisis. Much like Keith, whose talents, life, hopes, and dreams were cut short by a mysterious disease, millions of other Americans would die quiet, unceremonial deaths as well. Unfinished exists as a representation of a life well lived being cut short, and stands as a reminder to all of us today to not take life and all of its gifts and beauties for granted, since much like Keith, you never know when the universe will call in its debts, no matter how wealthy, famous, or talented you may be. In recent weeks, a major drama has come out of Twitter from users using AI to finish the painting. At first, I personally thought that it may have been people misinterpreting the story behind Unfinished and thought it would honor the memory and legacy of Keith Haring, but others are, well, just blatant bastardizations of the work and its meaning. Unfinished is exactly that, an unfinished art piece that serves as a sad but firm reminder of the failures of the US response to the AIDS crisis, the lost lives from the epidemic, and all of the potential cut short by the many young people that died during the AIDS crisis, and those that even today live with AIDS and are unable to afford life-prolonging care. To finish the painting would not only be an insult to Keith Haring and his legacy, but the millions of men, women, and children that have died and live with AIDS today. The painting, much like its name, was meant to be left unfinished. Keith Haring is an artist that has remained inside and outside the mainstream art world long after his passing. His work, from his humble subway chalk to building-sized murals, represents a better outlook on life and the people and institutions within it. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I thank you all very much for watching. If you have any thoughts about Unfinished or Keith Haring's work in general, I'd be more than happy to discuss it in the comments down below. I'm very thankful to have each and every one of you here in my audience today. I hope I could entertain and inform you all. If you like what you see, feel free to hit the like button. If you like the video, not only does it let me know that you guys want more content, but it helps me out personally in the YouTube algorithm, so thank you so much. Feel free to subscribe and join the Robot Factory today. That way you won't miss out on my video essays, reviews, and commentary on a wide range of genres spanning from 90s rappers to defunct home media technology. I hope you all have a great day, tell someone you love them today, and stay cool.